There is a place in Europe that most people have never thought to visit. It sits quietly between mountains and sea, tucked behind a narrow coastal highway that winds like a ribbon along the edge of the Adriatic. Tall limestone peaks press down from above. The water below shimmers in shades that have no proper name in English, something between turquoise and sapphire, something that feels invented. This is Montenegro, and for a long time, the world simply did not notice it. The fishing boats still go out before sunrise. The old men still play chess in the town squares. The fig trees still drop their fruit onto cobblestone streets that have not changed in several centuries. And yet, somewhere in between those ancient stones and those quiet mornings, something else has been quietly taking shape. Something that the world's wealthiest people discovered long before the rest of us. Take a slow breath. We are going to move gently through this place. We are going to let it unfold on its own terms. Because Montenegro does not rush, it never has. And perhaps that is the first thing it teaches you. The Adriatic coast of Montenegro stretches for just under 300 kilometers. That is a small number by any measure. You could drive its length in a single afternoon, if the road were straight and if you were in any kind of hurry. But the road is never straight here, and hurry, you quickly understand, is something that belongs to other places. The sea comes into focus slowly as you descend from the highlands. First, you sense it, a softening of the air, a saltiness that arrives before any view does. Then a gap opens in the hills, and there it is. A bay so enclosed, so perfectly sheltered, that the water inside it barely moves. It looks more like a lake than a sea. Calm and flat and polished like old silver in the early morning light. This is the Bay of Kotor, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the most extraordinary bodies of water in Europe. The bay runs inland for nearly 30 kilometers, folding back on itself in a way that seems almost deliberate, as if the mountains arranged themselves specifically to create this sheltered world. The Venetians called it a paradise. That was 600 years ago. The feeling has not changed. Small towns rest along the water's edge. White stone walls, red clay rooftops, bell towers that have been marking time since the Middle Ages. The reflections of these buildings lie perfectly still in the water below them. And in the early morning, before the first boats begin to move, you cannot always tell where the town ends and its reflection begins. Kotor itself sits at the innermost curve of the bay. It is a walled city. The walls climb up the cliff behind it, zigzagging toward a fortress at the peak, and from up there, if you are willing to climb on a warm June morning, you can see the entire bay laid out below you like a painting that someone never quite finished. The water, the mountains, the terracotta rooftops, the small boats that look like seeds from this height. Inside the old city walls, the streets are barely wide enough for two people to pass comfortably. Cats sleep on doorsteps warmed by the afternoon sun. Laundry hangs between windows. A woman waters flowers from a balcony above a passageway that smells of jasmine and old stone. Time moves differently inside these walls. It always has, but Kotor is only the beginning. Follow the coastal road south, and the landscape begins to change. The mountains pull back slightly. The coastline opens, and the towns you pass through begin to take on a different character entirely. Budva comes first. It is the liveliest place on the Montenegrin coast, and in June, it is just beginning to find its rhythm for the summer. The old town of Budva sits on a small peninsula surrounded by water on three sides, its stone walls rising directly from the sea. Inside, the streets are narrow and the buildings are old, and the whole thing glows a warm amber color in the evening light as the sun drops behind the hills. But outside the old town walls, modern Budva is a different conversation. Hotels rise along the beachfront. Not modest hotels. These are the kind of places where a single suite costs more per night than most people earn in a month. Infinity pools hang over the sea. Private beach clubs mark their territory with rows of white sunbeds and tasseled umbrellas. The sound of music drifts across the water in the evenings. The yachts anchored offshore are large enough to be mistaken for small buildings. And yet, even here, even in this more polished, more expensive version of the coast, a coffee costs less than €2. A meal in one of the old town's restaurants, grilled fish, local wine, bread still warm from the oven, might cost you €20 for two people. A taxi ride to the next town along the coast barely touches your pocket. This is the contradiction that defines Montenegro in June 2026. The billionaires have arrived. The superyachts are here. The boutique hotels and the private clubs and the helicopter transfers from Tivat Airport, all of that exists now. And yet, the everyday cost of being here remains, quietly and almost stubbornly affordable, as if the country has not yet decided to fully charge what it is worth. South of Budva, the landscape becomes something else entirely. The road narrows, the mountains press closer to the water, the villages become smaller and quieter, and the number of tourists drops sharply with every kilometer you travel in this direction. This is the coast that most visitors never reach, and it rewards patience in ways that are difficult to describe. There are beaches here that appear with no warning, a gap in the cliffs, a flash of white sand, water so clear that you can count the stones on the bottom from the surface. Some of these beaches have no road to reach them. You either take a boat or you climb down a path that someone cut into the rock face decades ago, holding onto a rope strung between iron pins. The beach at the bottom might hold 10 people comfortably. You might have it entirely to yourself. The village of Petrovac sits on one of the gentler curves of this southern coast. It is a small place. A crescent beach of fine, pale sand, a handful of restaurants along the seafront, their tables shaded by pine trees that have grown old and wide. A promenade where elderly couples walk slowly in the evenings, children paddling in the shallows. The water here is so clear that small fish are visible from the shore, darting through beams of underwater light. In Petrovac in June, a beach chair for the day costs €3. A cold beer from the bar behind the sunbeds costs €1.50. The grilled sea bass at dinner, caught that morning in these same waters, is presented with lemon and olive oil and local herbs and costs perhaps €12. And when the last light leaves the sky and the stars come out over the bay, there is nowhere else in the world you would rather be. But to understand Montenegro, to really understand what is happening here and why the world's wealthiest individuals have begun to quietly gather along this coast, you need to look beyond the beach and the bay and the evening light on the water. You need to understand the numbers. Montenegro is one of the smallest countries in Europe. Its population is around 600,000 people. Its economy, by global standards, is modest. And for most of its modern history, it was simply not on the map of international finance or luxury travel. That began to change in the years after independence. Montenegro declared independence from Serbia in 2006, and in the years that followed, the country made a series of decisions that would gradually transform it from an overlooked Balkan destination into something far more interesting to a certain kind of wealth. The flat personal income tax rate was set at 9%. For a time, it was among the lowest in all of Europe. Corporate tax rates followed a similar logic. Flat, low, predictable. The kind of structure that accountants and tax advisors notice immediately. The kind that begins to appear in conversations in private dining rooms and on the terraces of yachts moored in Monaco and Cannes. And then there is the residency program. Montenegro has, over the past several years, offered relatively accessible routes to residency and eventually citizenship through investment. The details have shifted with time, as they always do with such programs. But the principle has remained. Invest here, and this country will make a place for you. The superyachts began arriving in Porto Montenegro. That is the marina that sits in the bay near Tivat, not far from the airport. It was built on the site of an old Yugoslav naval base, which is a detail that feels significant somehow. The transformation from military outpost to playground for the very wealthy happening in the space of a single generation. The marina can accommodate some of the largest privately owned yachts in the world, and it does. Walking along the docks at Porto Montenegro on a June afternoon is a quietly remarkable experience. The boats are enormous, the kind of vessels that have helipads and submarines. The crew members move efficiently between tasks in matching uniforms. The gangways are polished. The guests, when they appear at all, are brief presences. A woman in sunglasses pausing at the rail, a man in a linen shirt speaking quietly into a phone before disappearing below decks. The marina has its own shopping promenade, its own hotels, its own restaurants where the prices match what you might find in London or Zurich. And yet, 10 minutes walk from the marina gates, you are back in a Montenegro that operates on entirely different terms. A bakery where a fresh burek, that flaky, cheese-filled pastry that locals eat at any time of day, costs less than €1. A market where vegetables are sold from wooden crates, the tomatoes still warm from the sun. These two worlds coexist here without much apparent tension. That, too, is part of what makes this place unusual. Let us travel now to a different kind of quiet. Away from the coast, Montenegro becomes something entirely different. The country rises steeply inland, the limestone giving way to dense forest, the forest giving way to high mountain meadows, and the meadows eventually giving way to rock and sky. This is a small country that manages to contain an extraordinary variety of landscape within its borders. The Tara River Canyon is one of the deepest gorges in the world. It runs through the northern part of the country, the river cutting through a landscape of dark pine forest and gray rock walls that rise over 1,000 meters on both sides. Standing at the edge of the canyon in the early morning, when the mist still clings to the river far below and the eagles have not yet begun to circle, is one of those experiences that operates below the level of thought. You simply stand there. You breathe. The scale of the place arranges something inside you without asking permission. The National Park of Durmitor surrounds the canyon. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the few natural places in the Balkans to carry that designation. Black Lake sits at the base of the Durmitor Massif, a calm, dark circle of water reflecting the peaks and the fir trees that crowd its banks. The water is cold even in summer. The air smells of pine resin and high altitude. The silence is so complete that you can hear the sound of a single fish breaking the surface of the lake from 50 meters away. In winter, the wealthy come here to ski. The resort town of Superyacht sits at nearly 1,500 meters, the highest town in the Balkans, and the slopes of Durmitor offer the kind of uncrowded skiing that has become almost impossible to find in the Alps. In June, the skiers are gone and the hikers arrive. Quieter people with boots and backpacks and no particular hurry to be anywhere. A bed in a good guest house in Jablajak in June costs around 30 to 40 euros. Dinner in the small restaurants around the main square, lamb stew, roasted peppers, local cheese, homemade bread might cost 10 euros with drinks. The national park entrance fee is a few euros. The trails are marked but not crowded. The mountains are available to whoever arrives with sufficient patience and comfortable shoes. Back on the coast, the afternoon light is doing something remarkable. It always does this around 4 or 5 in the afternoon in June, when the sun is still high but has begun its slow turn toward the west, and the angle of the light changes everything. The limestone cliffs along the coast catch this light and hold it. They glow, not brightly, more softly than that, more warmly. The same honey-colored warmth that the old stones of Italian towns are famous for, but without the crowds that now come with those places. The fishing boats have returned to their harbors. The fishermen sit on the docks repairing nets or simply sitting, their faces turned to the light with the unconscious ease of people who have spent their lives outdoors. The fish market in the morning, if you were there at 7, when the day's catch is laid out on ice, offered sea bream and sea bass and red mullet and octopus and things with no common English name, the prices marked in chalk on small boards, the fishermen willing to negotiate in a mixture of Montenegrin and elaborate hand gestures. In the evenings, the restaurants along the coast fill slowly, not with the sudden rush that characterizes dining in busier tourist cities, more gently. A table here, a couple there. The sound of conversation mixing with the sound of the sea. The wine is local. Montenegro has been making wine for a long time, and the Vranac grape produces a red wine that is dark and slightly rough and goes perfectly with grilled fish, which sounds contradictory until you try it. The service is unhurried, not indifferent. The warmth of Montenegrin hospitality is genuine and has nothing to do with performance, simply unhurried, as if the person bringing your food understands that the evening is long and that there is nowhere you need to be. The town of Herceg Novi sits at the northern entrance to the Bay of Kotor, where the open sea meets the enclosed water of the bay. It is perhaps the most overlooked town on the Montenegrin coast, and that oversight is the visitor's gain. Herceg Novi has an old town. It has walls and towers and churches that have been rebuilt and restored and burned and rebuilt again through centuries of Venetian and Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian influence. It has steps, many, many steps, that climb the hillside in terraced layers, connecting one level of the town to the next, passing gardens where bougainvillea grows in impossible colors over old stone walls. But Herceg Novi also has something else. It has a culture of plants. The town is known for its flowers in a way that is unusual even for a coast where things grow easily. Mimosa blooms here in February, earlier than almost anywhere in Europe, and the festival around the mimosa is one of those small, local celebrations that exists entirely for the people who live here rather than for any tourist audience. In June, the mimosa is long past, but the gardens are in full summer excess. Jasmine and oleander and roses and fig trees and lemon trees and things that simply grow because the combination of sun and sea air and mild winters permits them to, walking through the upper town of Herceg Novi in the morning, when the steps are still cool and the light comes in sideways between the old buildings, you pass through waves of scent without warning. Jasmine, something you cannot identify. Jasmine again. The steps are empty. A cat observes you from a wall. A window opens above you, and an arm reaches out to water the geraniums on the sill. The arm withdraws. The window closes. You keep climbing, and then there is Sveti Stefan. If there is a single image that has come to represent Montenegro to the outside world, it is this one, a small island connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway, entirely covered by what appears to be a medieval village, orange rooftops, stone walls, the sea on all sides. It appears in photographs with a frequency that borders on cliché, and yet when you actually see it in person, the reality is more startling than any photograph has ever suggested. For much of the 20th century, Sveti Stefan was a fishing village turned into a hotel complex under the Yugoslav government. Ordinary tourists, Yugoslav citizens, and a handful of international visitors stayed in the stone houses that had been converted into rooms. It had a particular romance that came precisely from its accessibility. Today, Sveti Stefan is different. The entire island is now operated as an ultra-luxury resort, the Aman Resort, which is among the most exclusive hotel brands in the world. The price of a room begins at figures that belong to a different economy than the one most travelers inhabit. The island is visible to anyone walking along the coast path or sitting on the public beach beside the causeway. But access to the island itself requires a reservation that costs accordingly, and yet this is, in its strange way, perfectly consistent with the Montenegro that is emerging. There are two versions of this coast operating simultaneously and without apparent conflict. There is the Sveti Stefan that you look at from the public beach while eating a sandwich you bought from a bakery in the village above the road for €2. And there's the Sveti Stefan that you inhabit if you are among the people who have the resources to stay there. Both versions exist at the same time, looking at each other across a very narrow strip of water. The public beach adjacent to the island, separated from the resort by a low fence, is one of the nicest free beaches on the coast. The sand is pale. The water is clear. You bring your own towel. You swim the same water that the guests of the hotel swim. The island looks the same from both directions. June is a particular kind of month on the Montenegrin coast. The summer has not yet fully arrived. The heat is warm rather than oppressive. The sea temperature has reached the point where entering the water feels like a choice rather than a challenge, and lingering in it for long periods feels natural and easy. The crowds that will press into Budva and Kotor and Herceg Novi in July and August are not yet here in full force. You can find a table at the restaurant you want on a Friday evening. You can park within reasonable distance of the beach. The light in June has a particular quality. Long days, so that the sun does not set until after 8 in the evening, and the sky holds its blue-rose afterglow until nearly 10. The mornings come early and cool, the bay still and misted, the mountains emerging slowly as the day warms. There is an enormous amount of daylight to work with, and the Montenegrins use it differently than tourists tend to. They rest in the early afternoon, when the sun is direct and the heat is genuine, and they emerge in the evening when the air softens and the light turns golden. and the cafes fill with a kind of unhurried social ease. Coffee is important here. It is not taken quickly or alone. A coffee in Montenegro is a reason to sit, to talk, to watch the water. A small cup of strong, dark espresso arrives on a tray with a glass of water and perhaps a small piece of Turkish delight. And the expectation, never stated, never necessary to state, is that you will not be rushed. The table is yours for as long as you want it. The water will be refilled. A second coffee will appear eventually, when it seems like you might want one. This unhurriedness is not laziness. It is something else, something closer to a philosophy about the purpose of time. The coast has been here for a long time. The mountains have been here longer. Whatever you are hurrying toward will wait. The money that has been arriving in Montenegro, quietly, for years, and now with more visibility, comes from a range of directions. Russian wealth came first, in significant quantities, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The coastal properties that changed hands in the years around 2000 and 2010 were often transactions between sellers who had no idea of the values involved and buyers who did. Villas on the hillsides above the bay, built in the Austro-Hungarian style with terraced gardens and views of the water, passed into different ownership for sums that seemed large at the time but were modest by the standards of what was available elsewhere in Europe. Then came Western European money, German and Austrian and Scandinavian investors who recognized the combination of EU candidate status, low taxes, natural beauty, and relative underpricing for what it was, an opportunity that would not remain indefinitely. Then, the Gulf. Investors from the Gulf states arrived looking for somewhere that offered European geography, a stable legal framework, and prices still far below what comparable Mediterranean property would command in Spain or Italy or Croatia. They found it. And now, in 2026, the combination of all of these influences has created something that is visible if you know where to look, but still remarkably unobtrusive if you do not. The villas on the hillsides are larger now and better maintained, and the boats moored in the marinas are bigger. The restaurant above the bay that was a family-run canoba 3 years ago now has a Michelin recommendation and a tasting menu. The hotel that was under construction on the clifftop south of Budva has opened, and it charges rates that would be unremarkable in Saint-Tropez. But the coffee still costs €1.50. And the old fisherman is still at the dock at 6 in the morning, and the cats still sleep on the warm stones. There is a village called Perast that sits on the innermost part of the Bay of Kotor, where the bay is so narrow and enclosed that the mountains on the opposite shore feel close enough to touch. Perast is very small, perhaps a few hundred permanent residents, a single main street running along the waterfront, Baroque palaces, genuine Baroque palaces, built by Venetian merchants in the 17th century, standing shoulder to shoulder along the promenade, many of them now restored, some of them still showing their years. In front of Perast, 2 small islands sit in the still water of the bay. The first is natural. It holds a small Benedictine monastery, very old, partially ruined, surrounded by cypress trees that have grown tall and dark over centuries. The second island is not natural. It was built by human hands, stone by stone, over many generations, beginning in the 15th century. Local tradition holds that sailors who navigated safely through the treacherous waters of the Adriatic would bring a stone to this spot, dropping it into the sea as an act of gratitude. Over time, the stones accumulated, an island formed. A church was built on it, Our Lady of the Rocks, and inside the church are thousands of votive offerings, silver tablets, painted panels, the accumulated prayers of sailors across 5 centuries, each one left in thanks for a safe return. A small boat ferries visitors across from the Perast waterfront. The ride takes 3 minutes. The boatman is patient and says very little. Inside the church it is cool and dim, and the silver offerings cover the walls and ceiling, and there is a painting of the Madonna above the altar that has been there since 1452, and the whole small space has a quality of accumulated faith that has nothing to do with whether you share that faith or not. Outside, the bay is perfectly still. The reflection of the surrounding mountains sits in the water with the precision of a mirror. A heron stands on a rock at the edge of the island and watches the water. Somewhere across the bay, very faintly, A church bell is ringing. It is worth pausing here to speak plainly about what it costs to be in Montenegro in June 2026. A good hotel room in Kotor Old Town can be found for 60 to 90 euros per night. A similar room in a comparable historic city elsewhere in southern Europe, Dubrovnik for instance, or Porto, or the Amalfi Coast, would cost 3 or 4 times that. A meal for 2 people at a mid-range restaurant on the Montenegrin coast, proper food, local fish, local wine, dessert, runs to between 30 and 50 euros. A coffee is 1 to 2 euros. Cold local beer is around 1.50 to 2 euros. Petrol is priced comparably to the EU average. A taxi across town costs 3 euros. The cost of a day on a beach in Montenegro, sunbed rental included, lunch included, drinks included, and ice cream in the afternoon, might reach 30 euros per person if you are being careless with money. If you are mindful, 20 euros covers it entirely. These numbers will change. That is perhaps the only certainty about Montenegro right now. The recognition is growing, the investment is arriving, and the prices will follow, as they always do. But in June 2026, there remains a window of time in which you can be in a place of genuine and remarkable beauty, on a coast that has attracted serious money for serious reasons, and still spend your day with the ease and affordability of somewhere the world has not yet decided to fully price. Let us spend an evening in Kotor. The sun is dropping toward the mountains to the west. Inside the old city walls, the shadows are lengthening between the buildings. The stone of the streets and walls has absorbed the day's heat and is releasing it now, slowly, with the warmth of something that has been waiting to give back what it received. The cafes around the main square, Cathedral Square, where the Cathedral of St. Tryphon has stood since the 12th century, are filling. People sit at small tables drinking coffee and wine, and the local craft beer that has appeared in recent years in small bars tucked into the old buildings. The square pigeons are conducting their own parallel social event, unhurried and ungainly. Children run between the tables without anyone appearing to mind. The cats of Kotor deserve a separate mention. They are famous, as cats in Mediterranean old towns tend to be, and they occupy the city with a proprietary ease that suggests they understand perfectly that they were here before the tourists and will be here long after. There is a small museum devoted to Kotor's cats. The cats themselves are indifferent to this honor. As the evening deepens, the light from the restaurants and the cafes gives the old stone walls a warm, amber quality. Music drifts from somewhere. Live music, guitar, a voice singing something old. The narrow streets fill and empty in waves as groups move between the square and the restaurants and the bars. But it never feels crowded in the way that Dubrovnik feels crowded, where the density of tourism has transformed the place into something more like a theme park than a living city. Kotor still feels like a living city. People live here. They buy their vegetables from the small market just inside the sea gate every morning. They hang their laundry in the courtyards. They know each other. You see the evidence of actual life in between and alongside the tourism, and it gives the place an authenticity that is increasingly rare on the Adriatic. The road to Lovćen begins just outside Kotor and climbs immediately, dramatically, impossibly. 25 switchbacks cut into the limestone face of the mountain above the city, each one revealing a more vertiginous view of the bay below than the last. From the top of this road, if you have the nerve to drive it or the wisdom to be a passenger while someone else does, the Bay of Kotor is visible in its entirety, spread out below you with the clarity of a relief map. The Lovćen National Park occupies the mountain that rises above Kotor and extends inland. The landscape here is entirely different from the coast below. A high plateau of gray limestone and scrub vegetation, the air cooler and drier, the silence more complete. From the highest peak of Lovćen, on a clear day, you can see across to Italy on one side and deep into the Montenegrin interior on the other. The Adriatic stretches west in a faint blue haze. At the summit of the highest peak, inside a mausoleum cut into the rock, lies Petar II Petrovich Njegoš. He was the 19th century philosopher prince who ruled Montenegro and who wrote an epic poem that is still considered the most important work in Montenegrin and Serbian literature. His mausoleum was completed in 1974, designed by the Croatian sculptor Ivan Meštrović, and it is one of the most extraordinary structures you will ever enter, a circular chamber carved from the mountain itself, dominated by a golden mosaic ceiling and a great carved figure of the man who spent his life contemplating the relationship between mountains and human dignity. Standing inside that chamber and looking out through the narrow opening to the view below, the coast, the bay, the distant shimmer of the sea, you begin to understand something about Montenegro that is difficult to articulate in any practical terms. This is a place that has thought deeply about itself. The morning mist on the bay. It comes every morning in June, before the sun has climbed high enough to burn it away. The bay fills with a low, pale haze that sits on the water and softens the outlines of everything. The mountains, the village rooftops, the boats at anchor. The world becomes quieter in this mist, and the birds that operate by sound rather than sight are the dominant presences. The splash of a grebe diving somewhere in the gray water, the call of a gull from somewhere above the mist, the creak of a mooring rope as a boat shifts slightly. By 8 o'clock, the mist has usually begun to lift. The mountains emerge first, their upper slopes already in full sun, while their reflections in the bay below are still partially obscured. Then the water begins to lighten, and the colors return. The extraordinary blues and greens that the bay can produce when the angle is right and the surface is still. This is the moment, before the day has fully committed to itself, when Montenegro feels most like its own best self. A single fishing boat crosses the bay from one shore to the other, leaving a perfectly straight wake that persists for several minutes after the boat has passed. The wake catches the light differently than the undisturbed water around it, and for a moment it seems to glow, a thin line of brightness drawn across the surface of the bay. Then it is gone, and the bay is still again, and the mountains stand exactly as they have always stood. The food of Montenegro is simple and honest in the way that food is when it comes from a place that has always grown and raised and caught its own sustenance. The olive trees in the coastal region are very old. Some of them are old enough to have been growing when the Venetians first arrived. The oil they produce is green and peppery and is used on everything: bread, fish, salads, the grilled vegetables that accompany almost every meal. The cheese made in the highlands from sheep's milk is salty and firm and crumbles into the salads alongside local tomatoes that taste, in season, the way tomatoes are supposed to taste. The lamb raised in the mountain villages is cooked slowly. There is a dish called ispod sacha, meat and vegetables cooked under a heavy iron lid buried in the embers of a fire, sealed in with the heat for hours. The result is something that falls apart at the suggestion of a fork, surrounded by its own rich juices, tasting unmistakably of the place it came from. The fish on the coast is always the fish of the morning. The sea bass and the sea bream are the most common and the most beloved, grilled over wood with nothing more than olive oil and salt, and perhaps a sprig of rosemary. The octopus is braised slowly and served with potato salad dressed with the same green olive oil. The mussels from the bay, cultivated in the enclosed waters where the temperature and salinity are perfect, are served with white wine and garlic and nothing else, a bowlful of things that taste precisely like the sea. And then there is the wine. The Vranac grape, native to Montenegro and the surrounding region, produces reds that are deep in color and firm in structure, with enough character to hold their own against the richness of the meat dishes and enough freshness to work alongside fish if you want them to. The wine is not expensive. A bottle of decent local Vranac in a restaurant costs around 6 to 12 euros. A bottle of the better estate wines, if you find a restaurant that stocks them, might reach 20 euros. It will be the best 20 euros you spend on the coast. There are things about Montenegro that do not fit neatly into any category. The country is a NATO member since 2017, which was a considerable shift for a nation that was once part of Yugoslavia and that shares borders with Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is a candidate for EU membership, a process that has moved slowly but that continues to move. Its currency is the euro, adopted unilaterally without formal EU membership, a pragmatic decision that makes the country easy to use for European travelers and investors alike. The political situation is complicated in ways that take time to understand. It has been complicated for a long time, shaped by the competing pulls of its European future and its Slavic past, by the influence of its neighbors, by the tensions within a small society between old families and new money, between tradition and transformation. There are ongoing debates about corruption, about the pace of reform, about the distribution of the wealth that has been arriving on the coast. These are real things. They are part of the full picture, but they are part of the full picture of almost every country in the world, and they exist alongside something else: the genuine warmth of the people, the extraordinary landscape, the food that tastes like itself, and the extraordinary good fortune of a coastline that has not yet been entirely consumed by the forces that have consumed so many others. Porto Montenegro on a June afternoon. The marina is full, or nearly full. The high season is not quite here, and a few berths remain empty, their finger piers floating quietly in the clear water. But there are enough yachts present to give the place its character. The largest of them, a vessel of perhaps 70 or 80 meters, sits at the center of the marina with the settled authority of something that knows exactly what it is worth. Its hull is dark blue. Its superstructure is white. Its name is written on the stern in letters large enough to read from the promenade. The crew is visible, moving quietly through their routines. A man with a chamois leather is polishing a stainless steel rail. A woman in a white uniform is carrying provisions from a trolley to the gangway. From somewhere inside the vessel, a generator hums at a frequency you feel more than hear. On the promenade beside the marina, the shops are the shops of a certain kind of expensive leisure: sailing gear, luxury watches. A gallery with art that has traveled here from somewhere more prominent. A restaurant where the menu is in 4 languages and the wine list runs to many pages. And yet, 10 minutes walk from the marina gate, the town of Tivat continues its ordinary business. The local bakery, the supermarket, the primary school with its faded mural on the outside wall, the small Orthodox church where the door is always open and the icons inside are old and dark and attended by a single candle flame. The distance between these worlds is short. The distance between them in every other sense is considerable, and Montenegro in 2026 is somewhere in that gap. A country holding both realities simultaneously and, for the moment at least, managing not to choose definitively between them. There is a restaurant, small and unremarkable from the outside, on a side street in the old town of Kotor. It has 6 tables. The tablecloths are white paper over linen. The menu is handwritten on a chalkboard and changes depending on what arrived at the market that morning. There is no website, no reservation system. You either find a table or you come back tomorrow. The owner is a man in his 50s who learned to cook from his mother and has been serving the same small rotation of dishes, with seasonal variations, for over 20 years. He is not interested in becoming famous. He is interested in the fish being fresh and the bread being right and the customers leaving full and content. A meal here costs perhaps 25 euros per person with wine. It is among the best meals you will eat in Europe this year. And if you had found this restaurant 5 years ago, it would have cost 15 euros. And in 5 more years, if the country continues on its current trajectory, if the recognition keeps growing, if the luxury hotel brands keep opening, it might cost 45. Or it might close, the owner having reached the age at which enough is enough and the fish is less interesting than the grandchildren. Everything here is temporary. That is not a sad observation. It is the observation that makes presence valuable. The last light of the day is leaving the bay of Kotor. The sun went behind the mountains an hour ago, but the sky above the bay has held its color longer than seems reasonable. Pinks and golds, and then as the color fades, a deep, luminous blue that is not quite night and not quite day, but something in between. The bay, which has been every color today, silver in the morning mist, blue-green in the afternoon sun, gold in the late afternoon light, is now a deep, still gray. The lights in the villages around the bay are coming on. Small clusters of warmth on the dark shoreline. The lights of boats at anchor. The lights of the fortress above Kotor, lit from below, glowing orange-white against the evening sky. The lights of a single car moving along the coast road on the opposite shore, its headlights sweeping briefly across the water. The temperature has dropped perhaps 5 degrees. The air coming off the bay has that particular quality of evening air by water, cool and slightly heavy, carrying the smell of the sea and something green from the mountains above. Somewhere in the old town behind you, a restaurant has opened its windows and the smell of garlic and olive oil drifts down the street with a domesticity that is deeply comforting. You could walk back. The old streets of Kotor are safe and lovely at night, the stone lit by small lamps, the cats now taking their evening positions in doorways and on steps. The square will be busy for another hour or two. The bars along the base of the old walls will have music. Someone will be sitting at a table with a glass of wine, writing in a notebook, looking up occasionally at the walls and the light and the sky. Montenegro will not stay like this forever. No place does. The equation that makes it what it is right now, the extraordinary landscape and the genuine history and the warmth of the people and the low prices and the discreet presence of serious wealth and the fact that most tourists still choose Dubrovnik or Split or the Amalfi Coast instead, is an equation with a limited lifespan. The EU accession process, when it completes, will bring changes. The investment that is already arriving will transform the coastline in ways that are difficult to predict. The tax advantages that have attracted wealthy residents will evolve as Montenegro's relationship with European financial systems deepens. The prices will rise. They are already rising, slowly, year by year, in the way that prices rise in places that are becoming understood. But none of that is today. Today is a June day in 2026. And the bay is still, and the mountains are exactly as they have always been, and the fisherman is back on his dock, and the cats are asleep in the afternoon sun, and the mist on the water in the morning is as quiet and beautiful as it has ever been. There is a word in Montenegro, miran. It means peaceful, still, undisturbed. It is the word people use to describe what they are looking for when they come to the bay in the evening, what they find in the mountains in the early morning, what settles over a good meal eaten slowly with people you care about. It is what Montenegro offers, still, in June 2026, to anyone willing to travel to it and receive it on its own terms. Not a rush, not a spectacle, not a performance of luxury or exclusivity, though the luxury and the exclusivity are there if you want them. Just this: the mountains, the water, the light at the end of the day, the smell of jasmine through an open window, the sound of a bell across the water, the weight of a glass of Vernac in your hand, and the warmth of the evening air on your skin, and the slow accumulation of a day that held more beauty than you knew how to expect. This is what has always been here. This is what the world is beginning to notice. And if you go now, in June, while the light is long and the prices are still reasonable and the places that matter are still discoverable, you will carry it with you longer than you carry most things. That is not a small gift. In a world that is always moving faster, always pricing things higher, always crowding more people into fewer remaining beautiful places, Montenegro offers something rarer than luxury. It offers slowness, and right now, in this particular June, it offers it still at a price that belongs to another time. Go quietly if you go. Walk slowly. Eat slowly. Sit at the edge of the bay in the evening and let the light change without hurrying it. The bay has been here for 10,000 years. It will wait for you to be ready, and when you are ready, it will give you everything.